Well, it's Memorial Day weekend when we honor those who gave their lives in war to defend the American idea of freedom, from Lexington and Concord to Gettysburg and Omaha Beach. They died to keep us free. Whatever our misguided leaders thought at the time, the Americans on the ground in places like Khe Sanh in Vietnam and Fallujah in Iraq, they fought to keep us safe and to make a more democratic world. This weekend, we pay special honor to our fallen heroes. They gave, as Mr. Lincoln reminded us, the last full measure of their devotion to preserve an idea birthed on this continent 250 years ago. And that, such a shocking and radical idea could be born at all was itself amazing. Many thought it was impossible, and yet it was born. And once born, it spread. Like Christianity 2,000 years earlier, this new idea grew in the souls of people who would lead a new nation, of soldiers who would die to create it. It gave hope to the poor and to the enslaved. Until then, the human mind divided society into rulers and the ruled. That was how things were meant to be, ordained by God, people were told. And the social and political structures that resulted were so basic to mankind's sense of itself that no one even thought to ask if there was some other way, not for millennia. The notion that free citizens could and should, by natural rights, govern themselves swept all that away. Thomas Jefferson and Tom Paine put it into words that everyone could understand. James Madison, John Adams, and others drafted laws and a constitution that created a government built on this new idea. And ever since then, America has been the place where that idea saw its fullest expression. And even here, the path forward was slow, bloody, and painful. Not only kings have power, others hold it just as tightly and are not eager to see it shared. We fought a terrible civil war, and once again, the idea of freedom won. We took another 100 years for that idea to become law of the land. Not until 1968 did we have a presidential election where nearly every citizen of voting age could vote. It took that long. This idea of ours that we should be free to govern ourselves means more than voting. Voting is essential, but it's not enough. We crafted laws to protect those with unpopular ideas, giving them the freedom to think, to research, to express their views. Our Constitution made it plain that no power could just take your property without cause. And by the way, even with cause, you would get your day in court to defend against the seizure. We set up a system that limited even our democratic form of government so that no person, however annoying that person is to those in power, could simply be detained, removed, except by a process designed to give the accused a fair chance at defense. And over time, we Americans grew comfortable with our freedoms. We grew confident that they were permanent. We had to rely on movies and books to learn about those places where a knock on the door meant a family member would disappear into a gulag system. And so we didn't notice the plot to take it all away. And now here we are. The Trump administration is, of course, taking people off our streets and sending them to prisons in El Salvador and elsewhere with no due process. They are, so far as we can tell, sending people into dangerous war zones like southern Sudan. By the way, a place where the government also warns Americans not to visit. And they're taking people without a trial, without an appearance before a judge. And the taking, they're sending masked men with no government identification to pick people off the street and make them disappear. In one case we know of, a missing person, their family got a lawyer, but the government won't tell the lawyer where the client is. The Supreme Court has ordered the administration to facilitate the return of one of these men, and the administration will not comply. And now the House of Representatives has passed a budget bill that contains something that's nothing to do with the budget. It says no money can be used by the judiciary to hold the administration in contempt if it ignores court orders. Imagine that. Imagine that. Now there'll be no judicial restraint on this administration, this king. And this follows, of course, the House passed this bill to make it harder to vote and easier to claim elections are fraudulent if they don't like the results. This is really dangerous territory. Look, there's a reason the Statue of Liberty proudly holds a torch to the sky. The idea birthed here has been a light to the world. It is a beautiful idea. And this weekend, we remember and celebrate those who died for it. It is a tragedy beyond comprehension that we should live to see that light grow dimmer, and all of those heroes see their deaths made meaningless by this crazy, crazy cabal that has stolen the Republican Party, taken control of our government, and is antithetical to all that we stand for and all that we celebrate on this holiday. I have a great show for you, and it won't all be as down as this, I promise. Stay tuned. Jill Wine-Banks is back. She is, of course, the first woman to prosecute a crooked president. How about that? She's an explainer of law on MSNBC and elsewhere, and a proud former partner at a law firm that did not cave to the lawless king in the White House. She regularly helps us understand the state of the law in our time, and I'm delighted that Jill is back. All right, so Jill, there's a lot of terrible news and some good news. I'm not sure. You want to start with the good news, and we'll spend the rest of the time on the terrible news?
Yes, I want to start with the good news. Yes, okay. Definitely the good news, because it is so seldom that I get to say there's good news. And the good news is that Justice Barrett wisely recused herself from a case involving an application of a Catholic virtual school, that is an online school, to be a charter school, which is a public school. That would have meant that the state of Oklahoma was going to pay for and fund a religious school, a school that teaches Catholic theory, Catholic whatever it is called. And she recused because she had been involved with the church when she was a law professor. And as a result, the court deadlocked 4-0, which means that the lower court, which is the Oklahoma Supreme Court decision saying you cannot have a public school that teaches religion, our laws require that there be non-sectarian public schools. So there is a total block now on funding this Catholic school.
Yeah, I think 4-4 was the deadlock, I was impressed that she recused. It's not the habit of Supreme Court justices to recuse. Certainly, we've seen plenty of examples where Thomas and Alito should have recused and have not. So I was really impressed by that. And this decision did not go the way I expected. I thought for sure this court would expand their idea of religious freedom to further erode the separation of church and state. So I think that you're right. It's phenomenally unexpected good news.
I agree completely. I think if you listen to the podcast #Sisters-in-Law, which I do, we really sort of predicted that was a likely or a possible outcome, and talked about how a deadlock court in a 4-4 would uphold the Oklahoma Supreme Court. But you're right. I mean, I personally I don't even say under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, because that was added after I was already in grade school and had learned the pledge. And I just don't think religion has any place in public education. And I believe that the First Amendment that says the state cannot create a religious institution and can't support it, can't establish a religion, means exactly that. It means that it can't fund religious education. So people are free to send their children to religious schools, but not with my tax dollars.
Right. I mean, you and I both believe in religious freedom, and our sense is that the guarantee of that freedom is that the state doesn't impose a religion.
Exactly. But you're right that the court has recently indicated when you're balancing the right to practice your religion against the right not to have it forced upon you by the state, that there has been a trend toward religious freedom trumping the freedom of other people not to have to pay for someone else's religion.
Yes, and there have been carve-outs for businesses not to, for example, serve folks who are gay on some religious grounds.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it's a very odd moment, and I'm delighted that we have this reprieve. I don't think the fight's over. 4-4 is not the vote that you and I would have thought the law required.
Exactly, but it is for now a good decision, and we live to fight another day when another case comes up. And I feel more confident should it be a Jewish school or a madras or a Mormon school that the decision won't be 4-4. It'll be against the establishment, and that they would have found a carve-out if they had gone 5-4 for a religious school, if Barrett had been part of the decision, that they would have found a way not to fund other schools. So anyway, we have to celebrate what we can when we can, because there's so many other bad things, including that it was a Chicago person who has now been detained as the suspect in the killing at the Israeli museum, at the museum in Washington, D.C., Jewish Museum.
The political violence on any side is not, there's no place for it. It wasn't okay on January 6th, and it's not okay ever. And it's not okay when somebody is upset about Gaza to go shoot people. That's just not the answer.
Exactly.
Exactly. Jill, I was impressed with the recusal by Barrett for another reason, and it's related to all the bad news. It signals to me that she, while I don't agree with her, particularly on some of the religious freedom cases, certainly on the abortion cases, it signals to me that she cares a lot about the rule of law, and saw that there was a reason to recuse. And the rule of law itself is where almost all of the bad news is.
Yes, absolutely agree. And agree, I wish in a better world that her recusal would set the tone for some of the other justices who have not recused in cases where obviously they should have. And, of course, that refers to the January 6th cases that Thomas should have recused from, and there are others and will be more. And maybe this will motivate some to follow her lead. It's happened before. The U.S. v. Nixon actually was an 8-0. It wasn't a divided court, but it was 8 because Justice Rehnquist properly recused because he had served in the administration and therefore felt he couldn't be fair, or that he wouldn't be perceived as being fair. And that's the important thing, is you can't do it when you will be perceived as not being unbiased. So I think this is a good start. I don't know that it's enough, but it's something. And in this day, when every day, let's look at what happened just yesterday, and that was accepting a $400 million gift from the Qatar government personally to Donald Trump. There's a cover-up that is being perpetrated saying that it's being given to the Department of Defense to be used as Air Force One and that it's free. Okay, so there's a lot wrong with that because, number one, it's being given for Donald Trump's personal use while he's president, and then for his personal use after he's not president. It's being given to his library, and I put air quotes around the word library because I'm not sure he'll ever have a library to the extent that it includes books, because I just don't think he reads. So library may be, worthy of air quotes forever in connection with him. But so it's not free because it's going to cost $1 billion, and I'm not misstating that, $1 billion is the estimate to retrofit it. It has to be taken down to the studs to make sure that the government of Qatar did not put any bugging devices in it or any other kind of controls that could endanger the president. I would say there's no reason for the government to spend 2 years and $1 billion of our money to retrofit a plane that he will use at most for less than a year as president and then take with him personally. When he's in his personal capacity, he doesn't need anti-missile stuff embedded in it. He doesn't need the special communications features that a president needs. So let's not spend all that money with fixing up a plane that isn't going to be kept by the government. And don't be fooled by his comparison of, well, France gave us the Statue of Liberty, and that was worth a lot of money. Well, first of all, that was not from the government. It was from the people of France, and it was to the government of the United States. It is a permanent part of the United States. It wasn't taken away by the recipient president. So you can't
It's not sitting in somebody's private garden. Right. That's right. Yeah. So Jill,
exactly.
Look, so there's this thing in the Constitution that we heard a lot about, the emoluments clause, that says a president can't take gifts like that. But our government seems unable to figure out how to turn that constitutional prohibition into something actionable. Right? No.
Well,
they won't do it. And I don't know, do we, the people, it says so at the beginning of the document, do we have standing to sue and say, you can't do this?
That's the problem, Edwin, is who has standing to sue. But let me just add that in addition to the emoluments clause, which may need amending to add a penalty for violating it, because right now there isn't one, except there is, because there's a statute that says Congress must approve any gift in excess of $480. Yes, $480.
Yeah, not 480 million or 480 billion, right?
Exactly. I don't know how to multiply. What is that? A multiple of a million, 4 billion? I can't do the math. No, but it's a lot more than $480. And where is Congress? Where is Congress on the power of the purse? Think of all the things that he has done. They appropriated money, and he refuses to spend it. That's taking the power of the purse from Congress. And Congress has that power, and if they don't use it, they lose it. Where are they? Democrats and Republicans alike need to take action to enforce the laws and their own powers. You would think even if they don't, and now I'm going to divert for a second, there is a suggestion that the spending bill has a provision that says courts cannot use any powers to enforce contempt for violations of the Constitution or of court orders by the courts. So it says any injunction, temporary restraining order.
I want to talk about that. I do. I want to spend a lot of time on that. Yeah.
Okay,
good. Let's come back to it. I want to just put a pin in it and come back to it because let's talk about the reason it's there, these contempt orders that are already boiling up. So we can put it, when we get to it, people can understand why those craven courtiers that call themselves the People's House actually did that. So let's talk about that because the attack on the judiciary from this president is broad and deep and unprecedented. They perp walked a local judge out of her chambers in Milwaukee and charged her with a felony. I think we looked at it's highly unlikely they will convict her of a felony, but that's what they did.
Yes.
And then in a case in Massachusetts, I think it goes under the name of DVD, is the name, the initials of the person
Yes.
that ICE says they took in error. And then they said, look, they went to court, Jill. They went to court and gave evidence that the DVD set never was asked, do you have a problem being sent to Mexico? Are you going to be safe when you were sent there? And DVD said, no, I have no problem with that. And they swore that, and they made it their evidence. And it turns out that was a lie. And now,
well, there's a lot of lies being told
in court. Lies being told in court, right?
Yes.
And judges are figuring it out, and they're saying, you know what, you can't do this in my court, and they're getting ready to hold them in contempt for lying in court, for refusing to obey their orders, and that's one example. But the Supreme Court told them to return Abrego Garcia, or to facilitate his return, and their answer to that was go pound sand.
There have been a lot of examples of there being possibly, or at least being considered for being held in contempt for not obeying court orders. And if you cannot enforce a court order, then the order is merely advisory. Oh, you can obey it or you can't. I can't enforce it, so it's up to you whether you will follow it. And the part of the budget bill, and I'm not sure that this is an appropriate inclusion in a budget bill because it has nothing to do with the budget, with either expenses or income. So if you have a law that says nobody can use any federal money to enforce a court order against the federal government, how are you going to enforce it? No matter who has standing, they can't enforce it. And they're saying you have to pay an amount of money as a deposit against possible damages that the party being enjoined might suffer. Well, how would you even determine what is appropriate compensation? And how does that ignore the damage to someone who gets deported to El Salvador or now to Sudan, places where no American can travel to Sudan because it's under a strict State Department watch that it's not safe. It's a war-torn zone. But we're going to send people there in violation of, I am sure, international law, to send them to a place where they may be tortured and endangered. It's just wrong, and all of this without due process. Let's not forget that the basic thing here is due process.
Yeah, and we're not sending Sudanese to Sudan. We're sending. No. We don't know who we're sending, but we might be sending a Canadian who happened to come in the country and get picked up, or a Venezuelan, or somebody who's coming here from Poland. Whoever they are, they get picked up and they get sent wherever they get sent, including Sudan, where they don't speak the language, they don't know anybody. It's the middle of a war zone. They're not being sent, and they're not being sent to Sudan. They're being sold to Sudan because we're paying Sudan to take them.
That's a very good point, and it's again, I go back to due process though, because when, for example, even the Venezuelans, the alleged Venezuelans and alleged gang members who have been sent to El Salvador, because there's been no hearing, we do not know that they are Venezuelan. We do not know that they are gang members. We know that at least one photograph of Abrego Garcia was photoshopped to put M13 on his knuckles, and Kristi Noem would not even admit that it was photoshopped when it clearly is. And so we're having people, it could be an American. Don't forget, it could be an American sent by mistake. They have sent other people by error, including Abrego Garcia. And it's just a total violation of our law. If they are, in fact, criminals, I don't think any American would be opposed to not allowing them to stay in the country. But I don't think any American should be comfortable with deporting people to a third country or even to their home country. And it turns out Albrego Garcia is probably the only person from El Salvador who was sent to El Salvador. The others are allegedly Venezuelan, but we don't know that. We absolutely do not know that. There's been no proof in court that they are or are not. There certainly is no proof that they're gang members. And there is absolutely proof that the gang is not part of the government. The U.S. Intelligence Service issued a report that was suppressed, and the people who wrote it were fired because it didn't go along with the false narrative that Trump is saying, which is that the gang is part of the government and therefore it satisfies the Alien Enemies Act. And by the way, there's a debate about whether it's Alien Enemy Act or Alien Enemies Act. But in the last decision by the Supreme Court, they called it Alien Enemies. So I am reverting to Alien Enemies Act.
Okay.
And so you really have a big mess where people are being deported, sent to, and again, I wouldn't even call them a prison, because prison, to me,
it's a dungeon. It's a dungeon. It's a dungeon. It's a
dungeon. It's a place where people will never get out, where you saw them.
Jill, we also don't, let me interrupt for 1 second. You're absolutely right. We don't know if they're gang members. We don't know if they've committed any crime. We don't know if they're Venezuelan, but we also don't even know who they are.
Right.
People are disappearing, and we don't know where they went to. And this is the stuff that Americans have no experience with, except in, movies about the Soviet era or about Germany in the 30s, where somebody knocks on the door and you're gone and nobody knows it. And I mean, and they're not even sending, agents of our government who are wearing government insignia, who identify themselves as members of the government. People are showing up wearing masks and carrying no ID and kidnapping people off our streets. And then they're being covered up by a government that says these were our ICE agents. Maybe they were, but then they come to court and they got nobody who can testify about it. We don't know. We said he made a statement. We don't know who took that statement. So
exactly.
It's a secret police doing secret work and taking people off our streets. And for all I know, they're going to take journalists next.
Or anybody in America who speaks against the president.
Yeah.
That's a danger that we, as you said, the disappearance of people. And I'm unclear whether it was Argentina or Venezuela that was disappearing people. But I should look this up before I say this on air, but I'm sure someone who's listening is going to let me know what country it was where people were just disappearing off the streets.
Chile. It was Pinochet's Chile.
Thank you. Okay. So we have examples from our own hemisphere.
Yep.
And as you said, we certainly have it from Germany and from the Soviet Union. And let's face it, probably from Russia right now. So people are being pulled off the street. As you said, we have a Turkish student who was assaulted by a group of masked, unnamed people and whisked away. And then the courts are saying, bring her back, and they haven't. Khalil, the Columbia student, is still in Louisiana, even though it's been ordered. And they did do a humanitarian thing and say that he could see his new baby and wife before his deportation hearing. And I say that
but not
with air quotes. I don't think it's exactly human. It should be out completely.
Yeah. Terrible people. And there are more and more cases like this. And among the other problems is it's hard to find attorneys for these cases because of the attack on law firms. So the few nonprofit defense firms that are helping are overwhelmed. They can't get the pro bono support they used to get from big law firms.
That is true. I'm proud to say that my former firm, Jenner and Block, is fighting the attack on them, as all the law firms should be. There should not be any single law firm that caved to the president.
Yeah, you say that to those big firms in New York.
To the
Cowards.
big firms. Well, yes, absolutely. And not only in New York, they're national firms, so they have offices right here in Chicago. It is disgraceful.
I hope you hear that, Kirkland. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I echo your sentiment exactly.
Yeah.
And Skadden and other firms that are killing, there's no reason for this. Paul Weiss, shame on them. And, I mean, Paul Weiss, the partners, how much do you need to make? How many millions is enough per year that you can't afford to stand up? They used to be a firm that really defended the First Amendment, and that was a liberal firm founded by Simon Rifkin, and it's just disgraceful. I talked to a partner there who said, well, we are a business. I don't think law firms are a business. I think that the profession is much more than just a business. And thank heavens for the ACLU and Legal Learned, who I can't imagine how he is handling the thousands of cases. And the Supreme Court, if I could, I've just praised them for this 4-4 decision in St. Isidore.
Yep.
But let me just say, they made it really difficult by eliminating and requiring that each defendant do a challenge to their incarceration or their detention, I guess it's called in this case, their detention individually by habeas corpus, as opposed to a huge lawsuit being filed for all the alleged Venezuelans who are being held, or for all the people who are in Northern District of Texas being held and whose deportation has been held off by a court until there's some kind of proof put. But we're in a very, very dangerous situation with the rule of law in America, that this can continue to go on, and that we can possibly have courts not being able to enforce their orders. This is just not how the founders of our Constitution invented it. I'm very, very concerned about what's going on in America. I think it's time for the people to take to the streets. I think these protests will have an impact. They have in the past, and even though it doesn't seem to be impacting this administration at all, it may impact individual members of Congress, the House and the Senate, and if they don't support the administration, then we will have a reprieve. And as I said in the beginning of the show, where is Congress? Why are they not protecting their own powers, their power of the purse? Why are they letting Donald Trump take that away from them? I don't know.
I do. They're not running in competitive districts because of a generation of gerrymandering. So they work not for the people that are in their districts, but for the ones that draw the map. And because of Citizens United and the unbelievable amount of dark money, they are, again, not working for the people in their districts, but rather for funders who you and I don't know, because they're not, right? So the Supreme Court broke the House. It's John Roberts destroyed Article 1.
Yeah, I'm afraid you are correct. Another criticism of the Supreme Court, probably one of the worst decisions ever, is, along with Dred Scott, probably is Citizens United, which has caused this problem, and was saying that political gerrymandering is constitutional. Racial isn't, but political is. You can draw a map so that only Republicans get elected.
Yep.
That is ridiculous. What happened to the rights of people who think differently? That is just unbelievable. And and it's not just the court. Let's think about some of the things that are going on. CBS caving and probably going to settle a frivolous lawsuit because they're worried about making a gazillion dollars in a proposed sale. And so shame on Redstone, the owner, for agreeing, or maybe it hasn't happened yet, but it looks like there's going to be a settlement and a huge payment. It's
to Donald Trump personally. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Exactly. Well,
they'll pay him personally in order to get his government, not America's government anymore, his government,
right,
to approve the sale of her company, which otherwise he would not do. And so she's willing to sacrifice the integrity of the journalism.
Yes. And if you've ever seen a quid pro quo, which is what's required for bribery, that's it. You know, people are arguing, well, the plane, what's the quid pro quo? What is Qatar asking for? I don't know what they're asking for, but you don't think they gave $400 million to get nothing just because they like him? Well, they couldn't sell the plane, which they were trying to do, and so now they found a way, we won't get a cash profit, but we'll get something back from America. And, just because you can't identify it doesn't mean it doesn't smell and that it isn't going to happen. And Redstone seems to be in a clear quid pro quo situation of, let's just settle it so that I can get my money. And he benefits, but look at all the other benefits. His cryptocurrency is making him billions of dollars.
Billions.
And it's just a direct way to funnel money to him. He's making a lot. The towers that are going to be built in the Middle East as a result of his first trip there and his sons preceding him there, all of this is just a loss of democracy and the creation of an authoritarian dictatorship, a tyranny that we've never seen before.
Yeah. Well, Donald Trump will be the richest man in the world. He's probably there already with the money that he's taken privately from people. And it's, I lived through, all these aldermen going to jail for $1,500 and you can have a curb cut to your house. Kind of quid pro quos, and these billions. There's no one, because Pam Bondi is not Attorney General for the U.S. She is the mobster's defense lawyer, and so she's not going to bring criminal charges against crimes of this government, which means they are free to do whatever crimes they want.
She approved the sale. Not sale. She approved the acceptance of the plane.
Of the Qatari gift,
That is absurd and is not based on any legal analysis that cuts it's just not reasonable at all. And she, as you said, she was and still is Donald Trump's defense lawyer.
Right.
And so is U.S. attorney in New Jersey who indicted who filed a criminal complaint against Congresswoman McIver for assaulting an ICE officer in a case that
which didn't happen. Yeah.
It will never go forward. The case against the mayor has already been dropped for trespass, and she was carrying out her duties of oversight. If members of Congress can't conduct oversight without being arrested. Actually, I don't know that she was arrested. She was charged and probably came in voluntarily. I don't think they actually handcuffed and arrested her. But they did the mayor then charges. So
they did the judge in Wisconsin. So they're willing to use the power of government to be coercive in every possible way. And I just, our normal defense is that if the Justice Department looks and the FBI investigate crimes and bring charges where the evidence warrants. But that does not happen in this administration. They will not do it. So who is capable of holding this lawless administration to account? I think the answer is no one.
Well, the courts have so far, but now they're trying to take away the power of the courts, and then the courts couldn't. And then it falls to we, the people. And I really think that it's incumbent upon every American citizen to write to their members of Congress, to send letters into states that have elections coming up, to send postcards, which has been very effective, to make sure that their views are known. I think these huge protests are having an impact and will continue to have an impact. And we all have to do what we can. I think, individuals are overwhelmed by how much is going on. And I can't follow all of the, yes, you can deport under enemy aliens. No, you can't deport under enemy. Yes, it's going back and forth and back and forth. And I think people are getting overwhelmed, and that everyone needs to pick one thing that they care about, whether it's the environment, whether it's immigration, whatever the issue is that they care about, and learn everything they can so that they can put forward a very cogent argument to people of a different viewpoint, and try to persuade people to vote based on the facts, not based on rumor. A friend of mine actually said to me, did you know that Obama was part of the Diddy trial, that he was at the parties? And I said, where did you hear that? She said, I saw it on YouTube. I saw the testimony. And I said, wait a minute, you know that there are no cameras allowed in the courtroom. There could not be any video of testimony. What you saw was AI-induced trash. It is not testimony. You can't believe that. Think about the fact that there are prohibited cameras in the courtroom. But that's what someone believes because they saw it on YouTube. We're in a fact-free environment, and we need to really all think about what are we watching, what is it real or not? Because nowadays, just because you saw it on television or on TikTok or on YouTube doesn't mean it's real. And I'm worried that people are being misled dramatically by Donald Trump.
They are. But you know what's real, Jill? What's real is the pain that Americans are going to feel because prices are going to go crazy up because companies are passing along the tariff costs. What's real is the tens of millions of Americans are being thrown off health care in this and will suffer for it. What's real is the interest, the troubles in the bond market, which are going to affect everybody's interest rates. I mean, they're governing for their own profit at the expense of everyone else, and everyone else is going to be hurt badly, and no amount of propaganda can cover that up.
I hope that people realize that. And now, of course, Trump is attacking Walmart, which said, due to the tariff, our prices are going to go up. And he's saying, eat the cost. Don't pass it on.
Look what he did with Bezos, who said they were going to show the increased costs of tariffs on everything Amazon sells, and Trump told him not to, and he caved, and he said, "Okay, I won't." Well, by the way, before we leave this topic, the topic of Congress and the law, can you imagine a world where a cabinet secretary is asked in a testimony under oath, what is habeas corpus? And her answer is, it's the president's right to get rid of anybody he wants?
No. If I saw that on YouTube, I would think it was a AI-produced ridiculous joke, except it wasn't. It was live streamed real, that the Secretary of Homeland Security, who has to be aware that Stephen Miller said we're considering suspending habeas corpus, does not know that it is the right of every person, and that isn't just citizen, it's any person, to require the government to show proof about why they are being detained. It puts the test to the government and doesn't allow people to be pulled off the street and deported or imprisoned even here, let alone sent to a third country.
Yeah, and if we had standards, Jill, like we had 10 years ago, just 10 years ago, not 50 years ago, if we just had the same standards we had 10, 12 years ago, a cabinet secretary who went before Congress and under oath said the president has the power to disappear anybody he wants, that's what habeas corpus means, would be impeached that afternoon. That afternoon. would be gone.
If we had standards, Edwin, that person would have never been confirmed.
Right.
And in fact, I would have trouble thinking of more than maybe one or two cabinet members who would be confirmed. Would Pam, or not just cabinet officers, what about U.S. attorneys? Would Ed Martin? No. Well, he wasn't. No. Would Janine Pirro? No.
No.
She wouldn't. Would Alina Habba? No. Would
Never.
Kash Patel? No.
No.
I mean, we can go through the whole list. And Kristi
Pete
Noem.
Hegseth?
Pete, oh, please don't get me started on him. Remember,
Robert Kennedy? Robert Kennedy's going to kill more Americans than some of our enemies did in wars.
Yes, or than COVID did, because any future epidemic...
Well, that was 1 million Americans, right. Yeah.
Not to be dealt with. Yes, I mean, just think about all that. So we don't have to worry about whether they'd be impeached for their stupidity in testifying after they're confirmed. They would not have been confirmed.
Yeah.
And it's shame on the Republicans who voted unanimously in support of these people, and shame on our system that gives no rights to the minority. Even the right of filibuster isn't effective in stopping the onslaught that we are now experiencing, which is why it is so important that we focus on 2026. And remember, it's 2025, so we're not that far from the midterms, and that is the only thing that I can see saving us right now. And, again, when Ed Martin was...
Your counsel then, your counsel to Democrats is to tell any reporter who says, why should anybody believe you? You hid the fact that Joe Biden was old. Your counsel to those Democrats is to say to the reporter, I don't want to treat you the way Donald Trump treats you, but seriously, the whole country knew the man was old, and we told him, you know what, you can't run again. We did something Republicans aren't doing, and now let's talk about the damage the Republicans are really doing and shame that reporter so that we don't waste our time. Can you believe we've spent a week having people look at their navel on that issue?
No. And it is one of the things that makes me really, really, really angry is that anyone is talking about Jake Tapper's book. I want to talk about the mental acuity of Donald Trump. I want to talk about his policies, even if he were mentally competent, which I do not believe he is. I want to talk about what happened with the president of South Africa. And
God, that was disgusting.
That was an AI thing. It turns out that those crosses were put up by protesters, and they have nothing to do with, they are not graves. They're just like the symbols when on the mall, soldiers' boots were put there to represent the deaths in war. It is disgusting to me that we would even spend a minute. Look, I think Trump is awful. I think Biden did a great job. I think he clearly should not have run. And I do hold accountable all of the advisors who said, yeah, keep him in, and who did not stop him. I think they should be barred from ever advising another campaign. I don't care to discuss whether or not Biden's announcement of his cancer was timed in a certain way, and of course now the evidence shows that he actually has not had a PSA test since 2014, and so did not know about the possibility, and that this was not timed in any way, shape, or form.
Sure, but none of it has anything to do with America's future. None of it. And that's what we should be worried about.
Yes. Let's talk about the danger we are under right now, not under what might have been if Biden had announced that he was not running years before he actually did. Yes, I'm sorry that we didn't have the opportunity that would have afforded us. I think Kamala Harris did a great job in the time allotted to her, and that the Democrats need to get their act together. I did not support the candidate who won to be chair of the DNC. I supported Ben Wickler and think he would be a better person. I hope they get their act together and start coming forward with a announcement of policies that people will understand, not talking about woke policies. I don't want our focus to be on, I don't know, trans issues. I believe firmly in the rights, but I think we have to focus on a platform that will allow us to win an election so that we can then do the things that are right and just.
Yes, and our coalition anymore isn't just Democrats. It's Democrats, refugees from the old Republican Party, people who don't want to be part of any political party, frankly, but care about our democracy. And if we can't be big enough to find space for everybody, and that include, by the way, everybody includes people who are trans, but it also includes people who don't want to talk about trans. So let's just find a way that we can include everybody in our future.
Trans people are as concerned about the price of eggs and about whether we save democracy in Ukraine as any other citizen.
Absolutely.
And we need to be talking about those issues and attracting a wide array of independents, former Republicans, current Republicans who are appalled at what's happening in this administration. And that's what we need to do. And let's not forget the millions of Democrats who didn't vote because they just didn't think it mattered. We need to show them that it matters. And
they're about to find out. They are finding out.
Well, and it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. So
all right, Jill, that unfortunately has got to be our last word, that it's going to get worse and not better. But I as long as you're, fighting this fight, I have confidence that we, when we get through the worst part, will get better. But I agree with you, it's going to get worse.
I think that it's up to us to make sure it doesn't. And all citizens have the right to protest and to make sure that we make our voices heard so that we make a difference. We're all in this together, as my sister-in-law Joyce Vance says.
Yep.
We're in this together. Let's get this going.
Thanks, Jill, as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Representative Sean Casten is back. As I told you last time, he represents Illinois' 6th congressional district. He's he's a remarkable representative who pays attention to his constituents. He understands the local issues. He delivers for them, and he also focuses on incredibly important issues facing our nation and the world, and the environment in particular. But he's also just been through this harrowing experience of the GOP's attempt at reconciliation. And I can't think of anybody better to report back from the front lines. Congressman, welcome back.
Oh, you're very, very kind to me. I'm awake, which is good, and I think at the point when I realized that I'd gotten 3 hours of sleep in 24 hours, Brendan Boyle reminded me that he'd gotten 1 in 48. So I'm one among many who's had a rough week.
Yeah, and for what?
Nothing good. It's just a heartbreaking. It's a heartbreaking moment for America. Now, obviously, the Senate, still has to pass this, and if your listeners are concerned, it's time to light up the phone calls, particularly Republican senators. But if this bill becomes law, it's a complete decimation of everything that we have come to rely on as Americans. Hakeem pointed out on the floor, and this is not hyperbole, the biggest ever cut in food assistance in America, the biggest ever cut in health insurance in America, and the biggest ever tax cut for billionaires in America. How do you go home, look your kids in the eye, and say, thanks to me, kids are going to starve and Elon Musk will be richer? Because at the end of the day, that's the trade. And that's even before getting to, the horrible things that this will do to raise energy costs to hurt our environment. It's just, I don't have a better word for this than mean.
Yeah, and blowhole in the deficit threaten America's fiscal.
I forget.
Yep.
Yes, and the biggest ever explosion in our deficit, $3.5 trillion, probably $5 trillion plus after it drives up all the interest costs. We are going to be if this becomes law, it will take decades to fix the damage that's done, and I don't know if we will even succeed in that fixing.
You know these people, these Republican members of Congress. Is this really who they are?
You know what I struggle with, Edwin, is that so many of us have been asked to become psychologists in this moment, and I'm not.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair. I apologize.
Well, I mean, it's a fair question, though, right? Because you do sit there and say, these are people who, at various points in their life, have claimed to support these things, and even if all you knew was to watch the debate on the floor, you would watch Republican after Republican not stand up and brag about what they were doing, but misrepresent what they were doing. You saw them say, this is, if we don't pass this bill, it's going to lead to a huge tax increase. This is not an increase in tax cuts for billionaires. That's actually not true. That is categorically false. The reason they're saying that is because they're taking two separate baselines. The Trump tax cuts that were passed in 2017 expire in a year. So you can say this is not an increase in taxes if you are permanently extending those taxes for the next 12 months, right? But you can't say that this isn't a tax cut for billionaires, because all those billionaires were sitting there saying, if that tax cut expires, my taxes are going to go up in 12 months.
Yeah.
And I say that because they are not right now going out and honestly representing what they did. So to ask why they're doing this, you have to first ask why they aren't honest about what they're doing.
Well, I think I have some answer for that, and let me run that by you. They don't represent the people in their districts because of radical gerrymandering across the country, because of Citizens United. They represent the people who draw the maps and the people who give the money. And that's just a different job.
Well, look, I'm not going to defend gerrymandering by any stretch.
Yeah.
But I do. That doesn't. You can't say that explains the Senate, right? I mean, the Senate is ungerrymanderable, right? It's the shape, and you can't say that explains, the fact that Trump really did win. More than Kamala did, right?
Yep.
And so I think while there are a whole host of problems with campaign finance and gerrymandering, I think also as Americans, we have to grapple with the fact that over the course of our history, we have always struggled with whether our government should be truly democratic and whether we should really look out for the least among us. Whatever your faith tradition, the Romans didn't like Jesus because he was suggesting that we should look out for the meek, for the poor, for the persecuted, rather than for Caesar. That has been a heretical idea for 2,000 years, and it didn't change just because our founder said we hold these truths to be self-evident that all white men are created equal.
Yep.
And so we've always had voices in society saying, I need to protect people who have something to lose against people who were historically kept out and therefore never got anything to lose. Right? And to really push for that has always been hard. We have, over the course of our history, taken pride when we have expanded democracy to include women, to include African Americans. But those have always been fights. And they have never been fights that started because the majority of people in power wanted that to happen. What we have right now is those voices that have historically been very strong in our society, controlling the levers of power. They are not nice people. They are not democratic people. They don't support the rule of law. They don't support equality. They are at odds with all of the principles on which we tell ourselves that our country was based. But those voices have always been present.
Well, even in China, even in totalitarian countries, rulers worry about what the people think. In some cases, more in where they don't have voting tell them. And I think the real horrors of this bill that passed, if it really does become law, are going to so hurt Americans that it can't be papered over with lies.
Yeah, and look, I want to be very careful how I say this. When our founders created our government, a big part of the reason that they put so many checks and balances in was not because they were just these, enlightened souls who just wanted to do well. It's because as they looked and studied the history of the world, they understood that if the public loses faith in a government and they don't have a nonviolent way to fix it, they will resort to violence. And, historically that leads not just to the collapse of governments, but to decades, centuries long periods of instability.
Yep.
And so the idea of having co-equal branches, having checks and balances, having tools of impeachment that was driven by political will, having regular, elections, was all around how do you create government that is stable even as public views change. And that's worked for 250 years, in fits and starts, obviously, with some, dangerously close periods to losing during the Civil War, but it's worked in the sense that the rest of the world has said the United States is a place I want to move to. It's a place I aspire to build my business, roll out my entrepreneurial ideas, because you understood that the United States as an idea was stable. And when we are at a point where the Republican Party is now hostile to the peaceful transfer of power. Remember, the majority of Republicans voted to overturn the election results on January 6th. After the Capitol was attacked, the majority of House Republicans voted to overturn the election results. So they're hostile to the peaceful transfer of power. They are hostile to the protections to due process in the Fifth Amendment. They're hostile to the prohibitions against cruel and unusual punishment in the Eighth Amendment, or else they'd be objecting to deporting American citizens to El Salvador and South Sudan. They're hostile to the ideas of equal protection in the 14th Amendment. And we are seeing now foreign investors selling off U.S. equities and selling off treasuries because they're shifting their investments to other countries where they now have more faith in the rule of law and stability of government. That's happening right now in real time. And if we don't get a hold of this, we risk creating what our founders tried to prevent, which is something where people who have, who disagree with the current government feel that their only recourse is to violence. And that is hugely dangerous. We don't want that to happen. But these chuckleheads are playing with fire right now.
You are raising so many different and profound questions. They do this thing. They get on the floor. They lie about what's in it. They do it in the middle of the night because they don't want anybody to hear. They're embarrassed by their lies, I guess. I don't know, but they really don't think they know it's not good for Americans. But as you say, the powerful people want what they want. But you raise questions about the structure of our government going forward. The old structures have worked well, but they've been played on the edges until they got a little rickety. You're in some ways, I'm so glad you're in Congress, because what we need now, unlike most of my life, where people went there to fight, as you did, for example, for the environment, for fight for climate change. What we need now are people like Madison who think about how we can structure the government to protect ourselves from the passions of our moment, and that because it's being undone. I mean, the Supreme Court this week said, forget independent agencies. That era is over. This unitary executive push has captured certainly the minds of the executive branch, but now the judiciary has bought it, and Congress, as you know better than everybody, isn't doing its job of holding its own prerogatives in mind, let alone checking any others.
I mean, the Supreme Court is. We need to stop pretending these are serious people in the Supreme Court. The fact that they're saying that the president can fire heads of independent agencies, but not the Fed. There is no judicial logic to that. These are just people imposing bizarre right-wing ideologies on the world who don't want to tank the stock market. Like that's it. I think. You'd mentioned Madison, and I've found myself lately reminding people of there's this quote of Madison's, and it doesn't translate well because he uses all this weird, flowery 1800s language. but he said that to build a government based on the rule of law and presume that it will survive because of the virtue of the people who run it is a chimerical idea.
Yep.
And therefore, we must depend on the virtue of the people who select them. And there is, you can call it naivete or you can call it wisdom or something in between. But to be a Madisonian is to have faith that the American people will wisely select their leaders. And you have to have that faith even when you aren't happy with the outcome of an election, because any other faith is naive. We're going to elect chuckleheads from time to time. We're going to put chuckleheads on the Supreme Court from time to time. But you have to trust the collective virtue of the American people. And part of the reason why I think I'm raising some of these existential issues is there is I think I can sympathize, even if I don't agree with some of the voices on the far left who are saying, we cannot tolerate people who are going to defend our institutions when the institutions have failed us. We can't spend 10, 50, 100 years waiting to fix institutions that the Republicans have broken. We have to go in and be just as willing to, tear down the broken parts of our society as they are and fix things quickly, because if they're going to break things quickly, what else are we to do? I sympathize with that urge, but no matter whether you have good or bad intentions, you have to recognize that it takes much less time to burn down a house than it does to build one. And it is a plan for arson has to be coupled with a plan to rebuild, right? And that requires people who have a commitment to institutionalism, whatever you think of that. That's really hard, right? And we have that desire has always been out there in our society. I mean, you look back, like how did African Americans tolerate the fact that for 100 years we didn't even bother to enforce the Reconstruction Amendments? They didn't give up on America, right? But there was a lot of understandable anger. How did women tolerate the fact that, even after the Reconstruction Amendments were passed, they still couldn't vote? A lot of understandable anger. I'm not saying any of the way that we, have disenfranchised groups of people, or the way we are today saying, if you are poor, if you are hungry, if you got laid off by the federal government, we're not going to give you food assistance when you're trying to figure out how to make sure that your kid can eat. Like, that is so cruel. Those people are going to be angry. How do we make sure that they stay virtuous?
Well, that is a profound question, and I'm not sure it's up to us to make sure people stay virtuous. It's up to, if it's virtue, it's up to the people themselves. That's where it comes from.
That's why I say it's Madisonian. Is that faith naive? But that is Madison's bet for our democracy, that a country based on the rule of law has to have faith in the virtue of the people who select their leaders.
Well, it's arguable about whether we continue to be based on the rule of law. That is a frightening question, but it's a real one.
Look, we can debate the chicken and the egg, but that's the risk we have to understand that we're in right now. And I think what scares all of us in Congress is that this conversation we're having right now is not happening in the Republican Party. So to defend a Madisonian democracy, to defend the rule of law, is a deeply partisan conversation in Washington right now. And we we have to fight the urge not to talk about it because it's partisan.
No, I agree.
But it's,
I mean,
but it's
I'm glad
that it is.
I'm thrilled we're having. I mean, I do think I do trust American people, and I mean, there were a lot of contributory factors to electing Donald Trump, to the Democratic Party losing to one of the most flawed candidates. I mean, a felon, for gosh sakes, a sexual predator, a grifter. I mean, we knew who he was, and yet we Democrats lost to him. And a lot of things contributed to that. But I mean, I don't think he wins going forward. The damage is too real. But we have to be able to count all the votes. We have to make sure that those votes matter. We can't have him say, oh, I had an executive order that said, you can only vote if you've proved your citizenship, and they didn't do that in Illinois, so we can't count any of those votes and have that fight again. We'll have that fight again. That's a real threat.
Well, you are absolutely right that none of what the Republican Party is proposing is popular. I mean, there's a reason that they claim that they didn't know what Project 2025 was. They're implementing it, but it's unpopular. I think we're in a race right now between will democracy destroy the Republican Party as we know it, or will the Republican Party destroy democracy as we know it? Because this is like Highlander. There can be only one.
Right. Right.
And that's not to say we won't have a two-party system, right? Because, I think there's a long history in the Republican Party of them coming up with good ideas, and once the Democratic Party adopts them, they give up on those ideas. Mitt Romney
gave us Obamacare.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to go back before that, cap and trade was invented by the Republican EPA. The EPA came out of Richard Nixon. The idea that the U.S. should be the world's cop enforcing the rule of law was basically George H.W. Bush in Iraq, right? And if you want to go back beyond that, I'm pretty sure it was the Republican Party that elected Abraham Lincoln to end slavery.
Yeah.
Right. So hear Republicans now saying, well, the Democrats oppose all that. Like, once we adopted it, instead of you saying, thank you, this idea was a good idea, let's make it national. He said, well, we better stop doing that. We better oppose it now.
Well, right? we need a left and a right of center party in America. We just do. Monopoly parties make terrible mistakes. So I'm completely comfortable with that. But I do think on the issue of democracy, we don't have two parties. As you say, we have one that's hostile to it right now. So here's an idea for you. When we take back the House, and I think we will, the Supreme Court in their Colorado decision on the 14th Amendment, on whether or not
Anderson,
right? They said, well, Congress has to take some action. And they cited some history. I hope that you guys will say anyone who supported the insurrection on January 6th is an insurrectionist and banned from being here. And then while they're gone, because you've kicked them all out, pass the laws you need to protect the democracy and invite them back to argue about tax policy. But, pass voting rights, pass, the things that need to be passed to preserve this Madisonian democracy. And after all, those great amendments after the Civil War happened while those same people were not in government. It's the only way it works.
Let's just run through process, because I came into Congress in 2019 when the Democrats at that point controlled the House. Trump was in the White House and Republicans controlled the Senate. So let's assume for the moment that's the scenario that we have in 2 years from now, year and a half from now. Can't come soon enough. We can do all those things you talk about. And in fact, in 2019, we passed H.R. 1 that would have gotten rid of gerrymandering, would have reformed campaign finance, lower prescription drug costs, on and on down, ban assault weapons, universal background checks. We did all that. The Senate didn't do anything. And we said, look, if we flip the Senate, we've got all this legislation, this work we've done that's teed up. Let's go get it done. We then flipped the Senate, and so those bills that we passed in the House never actually got to a point where they would have gone to the president's desk. Although we also understood that Trump would never have signed them, right? We then got to a point where we had the Senate and we had the White House, and we did a lot of great stuff. Like, huge respect for what Biden did. We really did slash prescription drug costs, biggest climate bill in history, biggest infrastructure bill in history. The Senate at that point, under the leadership of Chuck Schumer, refused to modify the filibuster, which means that we couldn't undo the damage of the Dobbs decision because we couldn't pass the Women's Health Protection Act because that took 60 votes, and the Senate decided it was more important to defend the rights of 40 senators than it was to defend the rights of 160 million American women. We couldn't pass bans on assault weapons because they decided it was more important to defend the rights of 40 senators than it was to defend the rights of 330 million Americans who don't want to get shot. Campaign finance reform, similar, like, these are all these issues. And so there is no question but that we can pass these laws to fix things, but we have to acknowledge that a Senate that thinks that it is more important to defend the rights of senators than to defend the rights of the American people is a Senate that is opposed to democracy. And I heard all the arguments at the time. You're going to want these protections when we're in the majority. I get it, you House members. You just aren't as sophisticated or as smart or as good looking as us senators, right? Whatever. And yet, look at what this Senate is now doing. They're now saying that we are going to overrule the parliamentarian to, block California's right to set tailpipe emission standards. Yeah. If you are not willing, as a senator, to do things that are supported by the majority of the American people because you're afraid that if you do, that a democratically elected populace will tolerate people who do things that are opposed by the majority of the American people, like, hang on that logic, right? How does that comport, right? And I think we have to have a pretty rich conversation around acknowledging those views on our far left, saying the institutions are a problem, and saying, let's fix the institutions that we can. But at the same time, let's make sure we still have, institutions that work where the American people say there are things that the majority of us want to have happen. And in our Republican majority rules democracy, they get that stuff done.
Getting stuff done is really important for Americans. And we do feel like it's too hard. I mean, I was standing there with Rich Daley in Chicago when he decided he's just going to tear up Meigs Field because he was waiting too long for permissions. Just sometimes you just got to get stuff done.
No, I mean, like, there is, all of us in Chicago, like, you love an all-powerful executive when they're doing what you want, and you fear one when they're not. Yeah, I'm more talking about a separate structural issue. I mean, let me just give you an example. So in 2022, we passed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act to make lynching a federal crime, and that was, and here we are on the 5-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. That created the political situation that allowed us to pass that. My colleague, Bobby Rush, who's now retired from Congress, had been pushing that bill forward in the House for every year of his term to make lynching a federal crime. And we finally got it signed into law. And when I talked to Bobby afterwards and, congratulated him on spending all the time to do this, and wasn't as good as he was near the end of his career to get it done, he pointed out to me that he had not actually drafted that bill originally, that he picked it up from another member who was retiring and handed it off to him to keep that carrying forward, who hadn't been able to get it done during their career. And so I walked back and went through the history. The first time the House passed legislation to make lynching a federal crime was in 1922.
100 years.
It took 100 years not to become law. It took 100 years for the Senate to decide to vote on it. Yeah. Because the Senate wouldn't break cloture. And so Emmett Till had to be born, lynched, died, create the civil rights era, and finally end up with George Floyd being lynched before the Senate decided that lynching was bad. Yeah. And so structurally, how has the Senate allowed itself to consistently not do things that are necessary and popular. And that's the kind of institutional reform that we should not shy away from, because that's not saying I depend on some benevolent despot. That's saying I trust democracy. I trust the will of the people, and God damn it, I'm going to fight for it.
Well, this is a separate conversation that we don't have time for, but the Senate itself, the disparities in the size of states is now so much greater than it was when the Senate was created, that we have a democracy problem built into the Senate, and that's a very tough problem to solve. I would love metropolitan areas to have senators if they're bigger than states.
Well, so interestingly enough, Article 5 of the Constitution that outlines how the Constitution can be amended.
Yeah, protects the Senate.
Expressly says you cannot amend the Constitution in a way that would reduce the relative power of senators. And so we've actually proposed a fix to that, consistent with Article 5, that says let's expand the Senate by 12 members, where those 12 members are elected nationally, so that the relative power of the states all stays the same. But then the Senate, for the first time in its history, would have a block of 10% of its members who have to respond to public will.
That's interesting.
That would be the first time in 250 years that would ever happen in the Senate.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting. I kind of think that Article 5, if I could change one thing in the Constitution, it's probably Article 5, because it makes it so hard for us to evolve. Yeah.
Well, I always think, as a guy who spent a lot of time as a CEO, if you look at like the provisions of how a contract is allowed to be modified, that's always the part of the contract where you realize what both parties to the contract were most nervous about.
Yeah.
And our founders, wrote the Constitution in a context where they couldn't talk about slavery, but they knew that was the subtext. And so you had these small states who said, the Senate is going to be my protection. And I realized that what I'm doing is really unpopular. And so let's make sure we can't get rid of that. And, the Senate did a very good job of protecting slavery. Good for them.
Yeah, good for them. Good for them. I have a whole bunch of other things I want to talk to you about, including the letter you wrote to, corporate leaders on the environment. But we're out of time. So can we do this again sometime?
It's always a pleasure. And I just really appreciate you. We don't often have times as elected officials to get into conversations of this depth and substance. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. You're also
very good at it.
Thank you.
Not everybody can handle a half hour. Very good. Thank you so much, Congressman.
Thanks so much.
I really appreciate it. Bye. Okay, everybody. I'm sure all of you had this experience as a kid. I grew up I'm so lucky. I look back at the brilliant and interesting children I grew up with. It turned out to be brilliant and interesting adults. There was always one kid who was smarter than the rest of us, and she still is. And that's Colette Holt, my old friend, who is a just brilliant attorney. And she is the founder and principal at Holt Law. She's led a fight that is now, I don't know, Colette, illegal. She's led the fight to make sure that things like municipal contracting around the country is fair, and that it supports all of the cities that where she's worked. It's just brilliant work. Anyway, Colette, hello.
Well, thank you, Edwin, and it's good to be here. And I don't know that I was the smartest kid. You're pretty smart yourself, and a very kind and nice person, as many people, millions of people, literally got to see.
Yeah, that was ridiculous. All right, let's just talk about let's change the subject and talk about the world. So how do you read what's going on in our country?
I think that what we are seeing is a wholesale attack on the rule of law as we have known it. You and I grew up in a world where we thought we knew that there were rules and that there were referees who could call whether or not the rules were being complied with. In your former work as an elected official, as a high-level government official in media and everything, we thought that if we had disputes about what the Constitution meant or what a statute meant, that we could go someplace, namely the federal courts, and get that adjudicated. And what the Trump administration is doing is tearing down or attempting to tear down the entire structure of the rule of law as we have known it. Certainly we can talk about the specific stuff I do, which is on the civil rights side, but it really is everything, everywhere, all at once. We have a Secretary of Homeland Security who clearly does not know what habeas corpus means. I'm not sure that the Attorney General knows what it means. We have the Congress undoing decades worth of government policy. We have executive orders that purport to change statutes and regulations, and the president essentially declaring himself the sole arbiter of what the law is. And so it's extraordinarily disorienting. And I think that that's part of the plan in many ways. Remember Steve Bannon talking about, excuse my language, but, flood the zone with shit? Well, they certainly have done that. And so I think it's difficult to even know where to turn to look to put any one person's individual energies into attempting to maintain our democracy and the rule of law as we have known it. I know that sounds hysterical perhaps or overblown, but I just don't see any other way to read this.
Yeah, it's not hysterical or overblown if you're following the facts. And the patterns that you're talking about are incredibly disorienting, but they tell one story. The man wants to be a tyrant, and and he has a complicitous Congress and a party that's helping him do it. They don't believe in American democracy; they believe in power, and that's a different thing. So that's where the facts take us. But there's a particular tinge to this tyranny. They want to build it on racial animosity, and that gets to your work.
I think that's very clear. Did anybody think that they would live long enough to see Afrikaners as the discriminated against group in South Africa worthy of refugee status when the Afghans who helped this country in the war risked their lives to do so and will surely be subject to, at best discrimination and at worst death if they are sent back to Afghanistan, do not have refugee status? I mean, talk about the world is completely upside down. Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's just right. What? How did we get here? And so Trump has built a career on racial animosity. I don't know whether to bother to call him a racist. I'm not sure he thinks about it that much. But he certainly stokes racial fears, hostilities, stereotypes to his own use. I mean, the man is completely transactional. And so if racism is the key that will unlock the door to power, well, he's got absolutely no problem using it. And sort of the viciousness of the attacks and the upside downness of it all is really built on racism and racial animosity. But we saw that in 2016. That has been his career. For those of us older enough to remember the Central Park Five, where he took out advertisements in the New York newspapers calling for the death penalty for those teenagers who were later exonerated, and has to this day refused to acknowledge that he was wrong. So he learned early in his career with his father and the civil rights complaints that were filed against the Trump group for race discrimination in offering housing opportunities. This is who this man is. And it's hard for me to believe that people who voted for him either didn't know or didn't care.
Well, it's almost too painful to talk about, but let's talk about it. Since there were very good people on both sides, I think it's impossible to say people didn't know. Woodrow Wilson showed D.W. Griffith's racist propaganda, Birth of a Nation, I think it was 1915 in the White House. Mm-hmm. And until this past week, that moment has stood as the high watermark for that sort of thing in the White House. But I think it was eclipsed this week in a similar way. That the showing of that film was not just meant to be racist propaganda. It was meant to show a powerful new technology that would be able to affirm those stereotypes. And then back then it was film for the first time. This week, we just saw it again with AI and the unbelievably disgusting performance yet again in the Oval Office when the president of South Africa was there.
Oh, absolutely. And with your media background and expertise, of course, you would immediately clue in on that. I thought what they did to President Zelensky would have truly been, the bottom of any behavior. But clearly I have a lack of imagination when it comes to these people. For him to be waving around some mess that somebody pulled off the internet as the president of the United States is horrifying and frankly embarrassing in its and its amateurishness. I thought that his silliness with him making himself look like the Pope was about as bad as the AI stuff could get, but clearly I was wrong. And when you think that this is somebody who has access to the most sophisticated, powerful intelligence community in the history of the world, that either he could get told like that or used to be, right? Of course, we have Tulsi Gabbard, firing people because Laura Loomer decides that they aren't sufficiently loyal to Trump. But I mean, to just get played like that is just astonishing, and the contempt with which he treated the president of another country is just really extraordinary. I mean, it was bad enough what he did to Mark Carney and a lot of these other people, but Trump really has no filters when it comes to dealing with black people.
None. And no bottom to how low he will go.
No, and really, these executive orders, we should probably talk about that a little bit, really are just executive orders. And so some of this is in these anti, quote unquote, DEI, whatever that is, executive orders. And a lot of the stuff I think is really testing the boundaries of where the courts will let him go. But I am now deeply concerned that regardless of what the courts say, that he's just going to ignore them. Edwin, the Federal Court of Appeals judge that I clerked for, Tom Fairchild, who, by the way, was the La Follette, Wisconsin Democrats' sacrificial lamb to run against Joe McCarthy in 1956, and was one of the very first federal judges to hire black law clerks and women, too. But, he used to talk about, why does anybody pay attention to me? I put on this silly costume and I bang a hammer around and people do what I say. Why? And so he was always concerned about the legitimacy of the courts as resting on some relatively fragile norms. And what I think Trump is doing, the Trump administration, the people around him who are scarier to me than Trump, are doing is really trying to tear down that structure whereby we all agree that whether we like it or not, the federal courts are the final arbiter of what the law is, and we are all obliged to follow it. I mean, one of the things that was tucked into the big, ugly bill was a provision that would require anybody who gets a contempt citation against the United States, namely Trump and his minions, to have to post a surety bond in order to get that, in order for the courts to be able to enforce their own orders. That is a direct attack on the judiciary's ability to enforce the law. And if somehow that becomes the law, we are all in really, really bad trouble. And of course, that can cut it, in all kinds of directions.
It's terrible. I mean, so you're right to focus on the undermining of the institution of the judiciary. And the Solicitor General, John Sauer, last week, 2 weeks ago, stood at the Supreme Court and told the justices that if an appellate court made a ruling, they would consider whether that was the law.
It really was breathtaking.
Breathtaking, right? And undermining the rule of law from the courts follows the undermining that they have done that led to January 6th, where they undermined the idea of elections. They want to destroy these institutions that are the underpinning of a democracy. Voting, rule of law, all this stuff. And a good chunk of America has abetted in this work.
Well, they have, and to some extent, when Trump got elected in 2016 was really where the unraveling truly began. Now, I think one thing that people, who don't follow this might not really know is that the federal courts had been undermining and paring back civil rights for a long time now. I've been a practicing civil rights lawyer for over 35 years, and I have slowly watched the Voting Rights Act get diluted and diluted, or in the immortal words of John Roberts, this country has changed, to which I thought, not so much. So that has been going on. The Students for Fair Admission versus your alma mater, Harvard, case, what will be 2 summers ago next month, that said that there was nothing that these institutions, including the University of North Carolina, a slave state, one might note, could do to ensure that the descendants of the people whose unpaid labor helped to create the wealth that sustains them can do anything to make sure that their descendants have a fair shot at reaping the benefits of those institutions. So, the federal courts have been part of this overall drive for the last probably at least 20 years, probably longer, to begin to undermine civil rights. And that includes, women's rights as well. I mean, can we talk about the Dobbs decision? And so what Trump is doing is sort of a piece with other actors who have been in place for some time and who may frankly now be looking up and be horrified at what they have wrought. I don't think John Roberts ever thought that.
Let me challenge that a little bit. First, I completely agree with your history here. I think John Roberts if his career has meant anything, it's meant the undoing of the Voting Rights Act. He's been hostile to it since before he got on the bench, and he's worked very hard to undo it. But all of these actions that really have gone all the way back to, the Powell memo in 1970s of sort of a right-wing takeover of the courts, of undermining civil rights, of undermining consumer rights. These were all done consonant with the idea of rule of law. They were changing the law for sure. But what's happening now is a wholesale undermining of the whole notion of the rule of law, which may be why the folks who enabled it with the undermining of rights, which put these people in power, that may be why they're a little surprised and frightened.
Well, I think that's right. And I don't think that we do disagree about that. I don't know what on earth the Supreme Court was thinking last summer when they basically told Trump, you can do anything you want. I remember exactly where I was listening to those oral arguments and thinking, oh, dear, we are in for a serious world of hurt, because this man is going to take this to mean that he can be a dictator. He can be king. I say what the law is. And he has. I do not understand what these judges didn't see about what was coming. And one of the things I keep hoping and saying to people is, well, I hope that they figure out that if they don't really shove back, I don't mean gently suggest words like facilitate the return of people who were snatched up in the middle of the night with no due process. If they don't start shoving back, they are going to make themselves into irrelevancies. And it's hard for me to think that they don't see that.
They must see. I just don't think they are. Their fealty to the law is what we would expect from anyone in the judiciary, let alone the Supreme Court. I mean, the ruling this week that said they can get rid of independent agencies, they can fire anybody, but not the Fed. I'm sorry. All that says is they're partisan hacks who don't want their stock portfolio to drop. Literally, I mean, it doesn't say that.
That was exactly my take, too. Yeah. Exactly, which is what makes the Fed so special. Oh, I know.
Nothing in law.
That will impact, nothing in the law, except it will impact what wealthy people can do. They don't care about union rights. They don't care about whether or not federal employees can unionize. They don't care about anything except their own portfolios. That was so nakedly partisan that What can you say?
You can say it's.
It really is. It really is. And it is truly terrifying because this country has always aspired to be better than it is. Whatever the failings have been, and they have been many. I mean, I'm old enough to remember segregated facilities, so it isn't like I don't think we've made progress. But we always thought that we could do better. We always aspired to the ideals that are in our Constitution, in our founding documents. And what is so distressing is that it feels like there are people in power who really don't fundamentally believe in any of that anymore. And it's difficult to know how to counteract that.
Yeah, get rid of them is the answer. Vote them out.
Well, yes, clearly. But I'm just worried that we won't even have another election. People keep talking about the midterms. Like, the damage that's going to be done between now and then is extraordinary. And there's something I would if you didn't see it or your listeners didn't see it, really should watch this little opinion video that was in the New York Times, and we can have a conversation about more sane watching by the New York Times. But it is a video by Professor Timothy Snyder at Yale and two other professors who are internationally recognized scholars of fascism and authoritarianism. And I was dumbstruck, literally, which is saying something for me, by when Professor Snyder says, if you have to say to yourself, well, it's not going to happen to me, then you are living in a fascist state. And if we take that perspective, then I don't think there's any question about where we are. Do I think somebody's going to come and drag me out of my house and put me in jail? Probably not. But the fact that I could say, well, maybe they're not going to do it to me, really does sum it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, one of the three people that was on that video, and it's great, is Professor Jason Stanley. And he was on this show talking about these issues as he was contemplating leaving the country, which is what he ended up doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. When the scholars of fascism are running for the door, that is a really bad sign. And I assume all these people have tenure. So it's not like they are giving up something substantial. And even for native Chicagoans, Toronto winters, that ain't no joke to sign on to that.
No. Hey, Colette, talk about some of the real world impacts of these decisions. Like, what is it going to mean in local communities, in municipalities around the country? What's it going to mean for students and financial aid? What's it going to mean for small businesses?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, these attacks on minority and women and disadvantaged and small business programs, which is my deep expertise, is going to have immediate catastrophic impacts, especially on firms owned by Blacks and Latinos in particular, because the marketplace is not fair. There is the market failure, as was put by a wonderful late Chicago judge, Jim Moran, of discrimination. And for those who believe in free markets and capitalism, and I actually am one of them, what we attempt to do with these programs, however imperfect they may be, is to open up opportunities so that, let's say you are the city of Chicago. You want the biggest pool of people competing for your work that you can get. You want the most qualified pool of people competing for your work that you can get. And these programs are really designed to do that. And they spread economic opportunity and wealth creation beyond those who have already been able to climb their way up the ladder, or in many cases who were born at the top of the ladder. And that has been an excellent thing for our society and our markets for everyone. Losing these programs is going to be catastrophic, I really believe. And one of the interesting things is to see small businesses who were owned by Trump supporters looking up and going, oh, wait a minute, what about that loan I thought I was going to get from the Small Business Administration, or the assistance I was going to get as a farmer from USDA under their small farmer programs, or how am I going to crack into new markets? wait a minute, I didn't vote for that. Well, you kind of did, because they told us for years that they believe that the entrenched economic interests are the way that it's supposed to be. So, opening up scholarships to kids who might not otherwise get a chance to go. To me, that's what always made this country great, was that we were always moving towards more inclusion, more people with opportunity, spreading wealth, which creates more wealth. And to drastically turn away from that now is just a mess. I saw something right before we got on that Chinese universities were offering admittance and I think maybe even free tuition to international students in this country, and particularly at Harvard, which of course is under specific attack, to go to their school. Well, if we drain the brains and the pipeline of the brains in this country, I don't know where we'll be in 15, 20 years. We certainly will lose our dominance. I mean, that's the one thing this country has always had at the advantage of everybody else, is fantastic universities, great research, and relatively open markets that we tried to support. To turn our backs on that is just a disaster for everybody, except maybe the truly wealthy.
Yeah, who basically are global and not citizens of one country. I had a experience years ago. I had an employee who was Chinese, who was becoming a U.S. citizen. And, to celebrate, I said, look, take me to a Chinese restaurant you like. I'll take you to an American restaurant the next day that is just as good. So she took me to this Chinese restaurant. She became a U.S. citizen, and I took her back to the exact same restaurant. She said, this isn't fair. We were here yesterday. I said, this is an American restaurant. This is what makes it so special, right? And she said, and then
a wonderful story.
Right, a few months later was the Olympics, and she watched the U.S., all those countries march in. And then she watched the U.S. team march in, and it looked like the whole world. And she said, no wonder this country beats everybody. It has all the best of the whole world. And,
yes.
And I believe that. I know you believe it. And now we're trying to get rid of it. It's shocking.
Well, and it's crazy. I mean, I live in San Antonio now, and this is a community that is at least 60% Latino. And one of the immediate effects of what Trump is doing is going to be to drain the employment base out. I want to know who they think is going to go and do all this work. That is what keeps things humming, which keeps economic activity going. There is a blindness about
everything.
How deeply entrenched, everything, but certainly how deeply entrenched so many immigrant communities are in the overall economic life of this country. And to cut that off now and to cut off programs that help those communities become better integrated, to open up opportunities. I mean, I said, well, since when did inclusion become a bad word?
When there were good people on both sides, when we elected this crowd. I mean, the idea that you can have when Kristi Noem said, I can tell you what habeas corpus means. It means the president can throw anybody in a dungeon. He has that right in the Constitution. That's what habeas corpus means, she said. And you know what? You don't have to go to law school to know that's utter BS.
Well, let's hope. I mean, one of the other, we were talking a little bit before about the long-term effects of some of the right-wing swings in this country. But one of them has been the gutting of civic education. I'm not sure, but that Ms. Noem didn't really believe that. And people are increasingly ignorant about our country, our founding ideals, basic principles that created the wealth and success that we have. And so when you see them attacking education, all this nonsense about critical race theory, that we're going to erase how the Montgomery bus boycott began, that to me is designed to make people so ignorant that they can't fight back, they can't critically analyze what is happening around them, and then that makes them much easier to control. I think about what you and I learned when we were in school about the Stalinist purges of universities.
Yeah.
Of scientific research.
I'm going to back away a little bit. I'm with, Tom Paine. I mean, democracy should not require its members to have to be scholars in democracy. It should make common sense. And the things you and I have talked about, look, everybody should have a fair chance. The country is better off when we are actually competitive rather than having, barriers to competition based on racial stereotypes or whatever it is. This doesn't require too much scholarship. We can explain it pretty simply. People, I think, intuitively get it. That's one of the powers of this system we have. And I agree with you. I would love more civic education, but I would actually like politics to be smaller, to have it not be such a big part of everybody's life that they have to think about it all the time.
No, and again, I don't disagree with you at all. I keep looking around at how can people think some of the stupid stuff they say. And so I just, wonder, what.
I don't know that they think it, Colette. I think they just lie. I don't think they think it.
I think you're right. I mean, and one of the
why have a budget hearing in the middle of the night? Why do that if you really think what you're saying is true? You know what?
No, well, of course, yes.
Yeah. All right, well, you and I are out of time. Right. We've run up against our time, as usual. And it's like I say hello to you and the half hour goes by.
Yes. Well, have me back sometime soon. We've got some cases I can talk about that are coming.
I love that.
Appreciate you and everything that you do, and hope this has been helpful for your listeners. And I think I will see you soon.
I'm very happy to hear that. All right, Colette, take care.
All right. Bye, my friend. Thanks now. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, everybody. I'm glad you got to hear that. At least you know a little bit about why I had a lucky childhood. Friends like that are amazing. We'll get to questions later, your questions later in the show. I look forward to that. And we're going to take a break now. The Washington Monthly's political editor, Bill Scher, is back. And in case you haven't heard me say this like 11 times, read the Washington Monthly and follow Bill on social media. It's just a great way to stay informed, not just about what's happening, but what actually could happen if we got our act together. Oh, Bill, our act is not together. Not quite. Just like review once again, even though I'm going to probably cover this 11 times at this show, or 12 or 15, what the House just did.
Substantively what they did?
Yeah, substantively.
I mean, basically, this is a bill. This is a so-called budget reconciliation bill, which is a process where you can pass legislation without worrying about a filibuster in the Senate, but it has to be budget related. And we've seen pretty much in the last 30 plus years, at least one getting through. Something that the president wants to do, can't really do on much of a bipartisan basis. Here's how we can get it done through a party line vote. And, for Bill Clinton, it was his tax increase deficit reduction package. For, Bush and Trump, it's tax cuts. For Joe Biden, it was the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a health and climate bill, and also American Rescue Plan Act, was also a reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
So the Trump tax cuts from 2017 expire. This is what they did because there's a quirk in the law in the budget reconciliation process where you can't add to the deficit beyond the 10-year window. So you can add it within the first 10 years, but afterwards, it's not supposed to add beyond that. So they keep doing things like sunsetting provisions. They'll expire, which is basically a gimmick to make it seem like these things aren't going to cost money, when we all know they're going to try to push for their extension. If they can't pass the extension, then it's going to feel like a giant tax increase for everybody. So they're in a panic about that. So the bill would extend those tax cuts add on some more tax cuts. But you got folks saying, hey, on the far right, hey, we can't keep adding to the deficit. You got to do some cuts too. And so they want to cut Medicaid, and they want to take away Biden's clean energy tax credits and other things of that sort. Now, it in no way offsets. This is still a budget-busting bill, and that's why there was a little touch and go for a while, because the far-right folks were mad that this wasn't actually making things wasn't a net cut of the deficit. But at the end of the day, the far right caved, and what they passed, it still has lots of mean cuts. You're still talking about losing almost 9 million people losing health coverage from cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, and cuts to food stamps too. But you get the big tax cuts at the same time.
Yeah,
so
I think it also triggers.
Kick to the Senate. And we'll see if the Senate, they're not going to take it as is. So there's still a long ways to go before they come to a final conclusion on it.
Yeah, I think the House bill would trigger Medicare cuts too. So because of triggers in the deficit bills. So hey, you're talking about the far right, and those terms are less meaningful than they used to be, but we're certainly talking about, in this case, budget hawks, people who really have made their career saying the debt is too big and it's a fundamental threat to America. I can appreciate people with different views than my own, but they actually have to believe those views that they claim to hold. And after years of table pounding, shame on me, I actually thought Representative Chip Roy, let's name him, and some of the other deficit hawks actually cared about the debt, but they don't. He voted for this bill, right? His whole career has been deficit hawk stuff, but now I think I understand him better. Tell me I'm wrong, Bill, but I think what he really is he believes that government shouldn't help anybody. He doesn't care about the deficit. He just doesn't believe government should help. There's
no doubt that, the thing that Chip Roy was angriest about were the scope of the Medicaid cuts. He wanted to go deeper. He was talking about able-bodied people who can work shouldn't get Medicaid. And even though Medicaid is not a program that's limited just to the poorest of the poor, plenty of people who have jobs but aren't incredibly lucrative jobs are getting Medicaid. So it's a program that goes well beyond that. And he can't stand the clean energy tax credit. So he was mad that the phase out of those credits in the first version was 2029. He wanted to happen sooner, and he got that. And what he didn't get was a bill that actually is deficit neutral, let alone cutting the deficit. And he's the one that was going on and on talking about swamp accounting. Both parties add to the debt. We have to stop this. Everything's going off the cliff. And he even admitted himself after voting for it that this doesn't solve that problem. But push comes to shove, what is more important to him, or inflicting that level of pain on people who need health coverage, and making sure that we can't transition to a clean energy economy. And to make such a big deal for there are 11 so-called Freedom Caucus members. That's what they call it, the Freedom Caucus. That's a weird caucus because they literally don't announce who's in it. It's a semi-secretive caucus. But when they had to vote for Mike Johnson for Speaker, they issued a letter afterwards saying, we voted for Johnson with the promise that a budget bill is going to reduce the deficit. And the implicit threat being that if you don't do this, we're gonna force you out of your speakership. And here we are, crunch time, and guess what? They caved. So we've seen in the past hypocrisy that Republicans only care about the debt and deficit when Democrats are in charge. So we know that's the past history. But there was this argument that maybe this time was going to be different. You have DOGE. They're willing to do lots of horrible things, supposedly in the name of cutting spending. And you have Republican control of both houses of Congress. You have narrow majorities, so a small group can extract big demand. So seemingly the stars were aligning for some serious talk about deficits. But at the end of the day, it's just the inflicting the pain seems to take precedence over having the numbers line up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm worried about the size of America's debt. I am. I think it's not an insane concern. I think it's a very real concern. But we, cutting taxes on the wealthiest people is not a great way to solve a debt crisis in your government.
It's the opposite of that,
right? Yeah, So I just don't believe that they care about these things. I think that all of the talk, I'm just revising my thinking, based on new evidence. I think all of the talk about the deficit is a lie from these people. I don't think they care about it. I think they just hate poor people, hate ordinary Americans, and want to do the bidding of the wealthiest who say, why should we spend any money? Aren't there, what was the line in Dickens? Aren't there workhouses?
Well, look, Donald Trump, we talk about this being a cult and everyone doing what Donald Trump says. Donald Trump said he was willing to raise taxes on the wealthy.
I don't believe that either, though.
He said it, right?
Yeah, he said, but Bill, whatever comes out of his mouth is a lie. That's just,
Of course.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is, if your primary concern was debt, it's a crisis. The bond markets are going astray.
Yes.
And we need to tackle this, and that's more important than anything else. You would say, you know what? Even though I generally think low tax on the wealthy is good for, investments and job creation and whatnot, this is the crisis, and so we're willing to make a move from our past position on it.
Yeah.
Even though Donald Trump gave them the opening to do it, they said, no, thank you, Mr. Trump. We're going to stick with the giant tax cuts and not caring about the deficit, but we will screw poor people at the same time. We'll at least do that for you, okay?
Yeah, so we know who these people are. Yeah. My gosh. Let me turn to the Supreme Court for a second.
The thing that is potentially different here, I'm sorry to talk over you.
No, go ahead.
Folks on the left often look at debt and deficit concerns as a ruse to make it harder to do big investments in healthcare and energy and anti-poverty measures and so forth. And there isn't a consensus number. We know the federal government doesn't have to have a literal balanced budget. It can run deficits. It can print its own money. It doesn't mean we go bankrupt. That's been well proven. But we don't know how far you can take it. Is there a limit somewhere that is literally too much? And sometimes people draw lines. Well, you can't go over debt. The debt can't be 70% of GDP. Well, we cross that. Well, it can't be over 100% of GDP. Well, we cross that. And life goes on. So we don't know what the red line really is, and we haven't had obvious negative cut. Right now, we're over 100% of GDP. The debt is. We had that for the last several years, and we're functioning as a society. But I'm not enough of a macroeconomic economist to say why this is happening. But it seems like that the bond markets took to heart that the Republicans really were going to tackle the deficit right now. Mm-hmm. And then when they didn't, that's when Moody's did its credit downgrade, and the 30-year Treasury bills, the yields went up. That it seems like that the Republicans might have blown the expectations game here to the point where we are going to see negative consequences for the debt being high. It is going to impact interest rates. It is going to impact your mortgage. It's going to impact businesses, ability for businesses to take loans out. And if that happens, then there's going to be a real reckoning.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know where the line is, as you say, but we do know that the consequences of crossing it are dire for individuals and for the United States in its place in the world. The consequences are dire. So when you have that, you think, okay, well, if the risk is like, I don't know exactly where the edge of the cliff is. because it's kind of, you can't really see. But if I keep walking towards it, sometime I'm going to fall down it. And if I fall down it, that is a really bad result. You want to say, well, maybe I should back off a little bit, build myself a little cushion. That's how I feel about where the debt and deficit is. That because the consequences of failure are so big, we should not just keep going until we actually fall and then say, oops, maybe I can back up. That's my view.
Well, the one thing that's very strange about this, no, I mean, you're absolutely right. And if you were more concerned about this, you would not be as wedded to big tax cuts, because it obviously is a main driver of debt deficits. But what's odd about Trump is that he actually is doing one thing to raise revenue, which is tariffs. And tariffs are not, the Republican orthodoxy is really intertwined with tax cuts. So I understand why it's very hard for them to go in the opposite direction and be true budget hawks. But tariffs do go in the opposite direction and really risk damage to the Republican brand. And we can't know if the tax cut package is going to offset that, because we still don't really know what tariffs are going to be left in place, because every day it seems like it's something different, which is also not good for business investments and the general stability of the economy.
Have we collected any tariff revenue, any tariff taxes, tariff revenue? I mean, they cut the IRS so much. I just think the tariffs feel scammy to me. They feel like I'm in a position, says Donald Trump, where I can cause businesses, organizations enormous pain. So they will have to come to me to be relieved from the pain I caused them. And it's sickening. Hence this week's grift meeting, where people lined up to have dinner with him and pay him personally boatloads of money by investing in his crypto scams.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's a way for him to consolidate power. He decides who gets paid and who doesn't.
Yep.
But it does seem, and it's hard to play mind reader here, that even after he does some favorable treatment for certain buddies, you're still going to be left with some significant tariffs, which are inherently regressive.
Yep.
They're regressive and will hit poor working class people harder than the rich. But at the same time, most businesses don't like them. It's not good for the overall economy. It's creating an inefficiency in the market that does not have to be there. And my takeaway from all this is you take the tariffs, you take the tax cut bill, you take we're going with debt deficits. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. It's not some perfectly executed plan. It is the addle-brain result of when you put someone in charge who is just corrupt with dull thinking, you get a mishmash, you get a kludge of an economic plan, which doesn't really work for almost anybody except for people in the most inner circles who get the graft.
Yeah. Yep. Just exactly like Mad King George when we had a revolution a couple hundred years ago. Yeah. All right. So enough about that. They did it. They did it in the middle of the night. They didn't want anybody to know about it. What we know is it's terrible for most Americans and terrible for the country. Bravo, House of Representatives. And it's going to go over to the Senate, where what's going to happen?
Well, we'll see. I mean, the people in the Senate want to put their stamp on it, and some people want to pull it more, want to sand down the rough edges, who don't want to go as hard on Medicaid and the clean energy credits. A lot of red states get that clean energy tax credit money. So it's not a simple blue-red thing. But there's also people who think that it's not doing enough on the deficit and want deeper cuts. Yeah. So we don't know how it's all exactly going to come together, and we don't know if what they do is going to be easy to reconcile with the House. I mean, if you want to make the bet saying, at the end of the day, the Republicans need the tax cuts, they need to extend the Trump tax cuts so much that they'll find a way and get it done. I actually understand that analysis, and it's probably right. But we have seen reconciliation bills fail. Obamacare repeal failed. The original Build Back Better bill failed. Just because it's a party line thing doesn't mean that it always comes together. Just a few people can throw the wrench in. And
3 Republicans, right?
Well, I think 4 on the House side right now. I think it'd be either 4 House or 4 Senate could tank it. And again, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but let's say the tariff bite is going to hit pretty soon. It takes some time for these things to sort of ripple through the supply chain. And if those numbers are painful enough that it takes down Trump's numbers even farther, he's up in the 40s right now, which is sort of where the Republicans are kind of comfortable. But if it went below 40, for example, would the Republicans say, you know what, maybe my political faith is not intertwined with yours. Maybe maybe you're unpopular, this bill's unpopular, and I got to save my own butt in 2026, and maybe I'm not going to come along for the ride.
Bill, I hope you're right.
Not, but that's
I hope you're right, but fascist parties have a way of imposing discipline on their members. They just do. Chip Roy.
That is what we've seen so far, no doubt.
Yep. All right, let me ask you a different question. I was going to ask about the independent agencies and that bizarre Supreme Court decision that somehow found the Constitution talks about the Fed, but no other independent agencies, when of course it doesn't. It's just ridiculous. So let's not even go there. Mm-hmm. How about this? Americans can't really be bothered to care about their democracy. And if we were worried about the rampant corruption in the White House or the transformation of the Oval Office into, a WWF site where we humiliate foreign leaders or, throwing people off insurance or creating a hunger crisis or raising prices on everything for everything. We don't seem to care yet about any of this, going to the grocery store into a casino game where we have to weigh the odds of getting salmonella against the benefits of leafy vegetables. For God's sake, what's going to wake us up?
Well, I don't agree. People don't care about these things. People care about the things that affect them in their daily lives.
Well, 40%, you just told me 40% is still there.
Well, look, there's always going to be a hardcore. I mean, we're still a pretty partisan country. You're only going to lose so much. I mean, even Nixon, held on to like 25% at the end of the day. So there's always going to be some folks who can't be moved. But we already saw a movement in polls. After the stock market started to tank, people didn't like it. Consumer sentiment has gone down. Fears of inflation have gone up. People see what's happening in their 401ks. Trump's numbers on the economy are upside down. Even immigration. Some people thought, people love deportations, but they didn't love deporting people who when they don't have any legal basis for it. And those numbers are upside down for Trump now, too. So, I don't think Trump wins re-election if he had the election today. Yeah. But of course, it's not where we're at. I think the evidence has shown that people voted for Trump by and large. So they thought he was going to lower their prices, and they were mad at Biden that prices went up. Then Kamala was tethered to that, and Trump's had this aura of someone that whatever else you think about him, he knows the economy and he'll get prices down. And then he literally did the exact opposite as soon as he could and made a unilateral policy to increase prices. People are angry. Enough people are angry about that it should really scare the hell out of Republicans who, unlike Trump, have to be on the ballot in 2026.
Yep. Hey, you've driven me back to the House bill that just passed by talking about immigration and deportation. The one thing that gets the biggest growth in the bill is ICE and building huge detention centers in America. They got like a 300% increase or something. They want to be able to house 100,000 people at a time in detention in I don't know what to call them, internal concentration camps that we're going to be building. That's in this bill, right?
I believe so. And, they need that because they want to deport as many people as possible, ignoring due process as much as they can. But they don't have places to put them. trying to send people to foreign prisons.
Yeah, buying slots in Sudan.
Foreign places.
Yeah.
Right. That's because there's only so many countries that want to play ball with this ludicrous scheme. And I mean, they've talked about trying to deport, 1 million, 2 million people. South Sudan's not taking 2 million people.
Particularly when Trump describes them all as violent, dangerous criminals. Sure. Who wants that?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the only way you'd want is if there's some kind of quid pro quo going on. But you only can do that so much. But again, I don't think any of this is well thought out. You still would need just an immense amount of person power to track down the numbers of people of that size, let alone incarcerate them and maintain that facility. All that is expensive, laborious, not easy to execute, and also not good for the economy. You're taking people out of the workforce at a time.
By the way, where are you going to find the staff to staff up, ICE and these detention centers? Where are you going to? Oh, I know. Never mind. All those people who we pardoned on January 6th, of course. That's who he wants to do this.
You ask any local state government official how easy it is right now to find workers.
Yeah.
They will tell you they're having a tough time. There is not a huge number of people waiting to take on these sorts of jobs. We have a fairly tight labor market. So none of this is thought out. And at the end of the day, I don't even think Trump really cares about hitting metrics. I don't think he's going to be sad if I really wanted to deport 2 million people and it only ended up being 500,000. Like, that's not the way this guy thinks. This is not someone who cares about governing outcomes. He cares about the optics in the news cycle on a day-to-day basis. He does not think about 1 week, 2 weeks, 6 months later. So a lot of this is what can you do for show? What can you throw money at? What can you hold? Who can you haul in front of the cameras? What can you build? Whether it all comes together in a logical way is completely irrelevant to the project.
Okay. Well, speaking of news cycle, what's more relevant to America's future? The things we've been talking about, like this bill that's coming due, or spending a whole lot of time wondering why we didn't know that Joe Biden was old in 2024? Because I think America knew that, but why is that a news item?
I mean, it's a news item because you have a new book called Original Sin, written by someone at CNN and someone at Axios, and so they have understandable incentive to promote their work. And I don't think it's right people reporting on it. Like, it is a story that the specifics of what happened behind the scenes should be known. You read any presidential biography with a president who had a health issue, you want to know what exactly happened and how it impacted policy.
Is that a one news cycle story? A 2 news cycle story? Is it a more important story than taking a $500 million Qatari jet? Is it a more important story than, the tariff stuff you and I are talking about, or the grift, or any of it? It seems like, once again, Democrats have been told, oh, this is going to haunt you. And instead of saying, shut up, you're an idiot, they just said, oh, my God, I have to talk about this for a week.
Well, that's the last part I think is very key here, because all the things you compare it to are things that are affecting people's day-to-day lives today, and therefore is far more relevant in terms of how can I shape how my democracy is going, who am I going to vote for in 26, 28, how policies are affecting me is more important than what happened in the past. History is important. We should learn from history. I'm not saying we should ignore it, but, as far as like our day-to-day right now, this is more important. What the media narrative that's trying to be sort of artificially pushed is Democrats, you have to reckon with what happened with Biden. You have to either disavow things that you said in defense of Biden or attack others who said things in defense of Biden if you're going to prove your trustworthiness and your viability for 26 and 28. And that's just artificial. Like, there's no evidence that the broader public is demanding that. There's no evidence of any sort of actual scandalous cover-up that would really necessitate some kind of purging or apology. You just had a very complicated, awkward situation where, in retrospect, should Biden have run a second time at all? Absolutely not.
Yes, and Democrats forced him off the ballot. Let's just be clear about that. It was Democrats who went to him and said, Joe, you can't run. So, I mean, it's all nonsense, and Democrats should, once again, not take the bait.
Democrats did that. Democrats did what you said when it became clear.
Yes.
And
but they don't have
to do it before because it wasn't clear. Biden had enough good days. He gave good State of the Union addresses. He was governing well. The economy was improving.
Passed some great laws.
Something like early stage dementia from afar is not a simple thing because things like senior moments can be precursors to dementia or they cannot. And you and I are not doctors. So we try not to be ageist. We try not to punish people just because they might, walk a little more stiffly. But once it became clear, we still didn't know if there is something really deeply concerned like dementia or not. We still don't have that kind of diagnosis, but the debate, I think, was unsettling enough. And Biden's handling it in the aftermath was not nearly satisfactory enough to say, you know what, we can't really take a gamble on you at this point. But there's even after all this reporting, there's no evidence of like, oh yeah, we knew he had condition X, and we're not going to tell you about it. There's no evidence of that.
Just none, zero. Right. So Lucy puts down the football. Charlie Brown runs ahead of it. It's not there. He swings and misses. It's the same thing over and over. Well, Bill, we run out of time. Thank you so much, as always. And wow, what a week. What a week.
Yeah. Well, it's always good to talk to you, even in unpleasant circumstances.
Yep. Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye. All right, everybody. That was Bill Scher, the political editor at the Washington Monthly. Pay attention to his work, please. We'll be back.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. Jim, kick us off.
Hi, Edwin.
Jim?
Happy Memorial Day. All I can say, it's a fool's errand to talk about Joe Biden, who had a strenuous campaign for president. He had plenty of challengers. They know how old he was. He won by 81 million votes. And what clairvoyant is going to tell me when was the best time to drop out? A week after he was sworn in the office? A month? How would they go about it? Would they have a primary, et cetera, et cetera? It's just a fool's errand to even bring it up. And also, the Republicans that I knew were on TikTok and Facebook and so on. He's an old man. You can see he's a dithering old man. That was their whole campaign. But if I could, it reminds me, it kind of smacks of the 44 election with FDR. Everybody on earth knew he was not going to live to the fourth term. Everybody. He had to jettison Wallace because he was too far out, and they had to pick somebody. So they picked Truman. And everybody on earth, Ho Chi Minh, Stalin, everybody knew he was going to die. But they went with him anyway because he was going to win the peace, et cetera, et cetera. My point is, to blame Joe Biden for this catastrophe is absolutely nuts. It's just nuts. I mean, do you have an idea, Edwin, when he would drop? What time in American history should FDR have dropped out when he was ready to die in 44? I mean, come on. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd. Biden didn't invite this catastrophe. The Republican Party did. 40% of them believed that Biden cheated the election. Everybody was sued. Everybody went to court. They had fake electors and everything else. They just ignored it and voted for him anyway. So I don't want to hear anybody going back 10 minutes ago, as far as I'm concerned, because you can't do anything about 10 minutes ago. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Biden was my favorite president, and I'm going back to Jack Kennedy.
Yeah,
so much for that nonsense. And that was just nonsense. That's all. Because that's all the Republicans talk about. Oh, he's an old man. You know that Obama's really running the show. Obama's running the show because he doesn't know what he's doing. And I mean, that was their whole smear. And Trump was the strong man. You know, he was the Atlas of politics. So he was, his doctor said he was in the pink. He's in the pink. He took a couple of ridiculous questions. You know, an elephant. He could put an elephant from a tiger, and that made him a genius. I mean, come on. I mean, to have this story even have any legs is just amazing. Anyway, have a good Memorial Day. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jim, and a lot of good points there. And you know, very important not to get sucked in to the crazy. And the Republicans do it well, but we now know who they are. They are trying to dismantle our democracy and to keep us distracted by other things. And, you know, arguing about Joe Biden is irrelevant at this point. We need to focus on the fight we're in, period. And they'll do anything to change the subject. All right, Nancy, you're next.
Hey, Edwin, how are you?
Thank you. I'm good. Hey, Nancy, I don't know if you caught the show 2 weeks ago, but I had a guest and we talked about you.
You know, I think I caught the end of it because I was wondering if that what exactly was it? Because I was wondering.
In Wisconsin, they're working on a way of voting that will allow small parties to accumulate votes, as it used to be in America before the two-party system. So people can run in more than one party. You can run in a small one and as a Democrat. You can run it, you know, and that way you begin to address some of the polarization and have more options.
Exactly. Thank you. I wish I would have heard the whole thing. But that's what I'm calling about. You finally hit on two things today that I've been screaming about forever since I've been voting. The one was the undemocratic system of government that never grew and never expanded and never changed from day one. You know, I give the founding fathers all the credit. You know, they worked with what they had at the time, and they did a damn good job. But since then, we've been living under an illusion of democracy. And the other thing you said just now, not with the guest previous to this, but the one right after Caston, who, by the way, is my representative, and he's a good one, but that got screwed up, too, with Marie Newman, but don't get me started on that. You know, there are, like you just said about this stupid book that's all anybody's doing these days is reading a book. We don't have time. I mean, reading a book, writing a book. We don't have time for that. They put us in a position where all we have to do is, all we can do is work our butts off every day, all day, because we can't afford to live and feed our families. And then they write books and, oh, you got to read this. You got to read. Writing a book is not going to do us a damn bit of good. How about fixing our government? And when you just said about telling those guys instead of read the book, telling them you're stupid and shut up, that's what they should be doing. But the Democrats fall into that, you know, trap of the cons every single time. They did not ever fight for us hard enough. And that's why we have the not-so-Supreme Court making laws against giving the felon, you know, what am I trying to say? You know, that he's not responsible. You know, he's above the law.
Above the law. That he's a king.
I call this government every day. And don't forget, President Biden said in the beginning, if I'm remembering correctly, and I believe I am, he was going to be a one-term president. They mishandled all that, too. And I don't care what anybody says, we have not had a fair election in I don't know how long. If there are foreign governments involved, then there is not a fair, free, or whatever you want to call it, equal, you know, election. It just ain't happening. Nobody's going to convince me, and that's another thing that Dems don't do. They're not going to convince me it was a fair election and he took everything. Baloney. And they don't. And now, answer me this. What is going to happen now that they're ignoring the law? judges are saying you can't do that. Oh, too bad. We're going to do it anyway. And we've got all the morons in there now, and that's because of this undemocratic system that we're following, that we followed. We started with it, which was a good thing, but it went downhill. I can't believe it's 2025. We lost our democracy a long time ago. We don't have media representation. The free press was bought out by all the corporations long ago. We don't have, anybody. And the problem is everybody keeps saying, oh, well, we've been through this before. We'll do it again. No, we have not been through this before. And I'll tell you why. The Internet. They did nothing about taking control of the Internet when that first started. And now we don't have everybody watching 3 or 4, 5 news stations and getting the story, both sides of a story. They're going to the Internet and going on the computer and just looking for people who agree with them. And then they look up the people who don't agree with them and call them names and threaten them. And that's what our problem is. We have no control over anything anymore. And I'd be surprised if we get out of this. I hate to be so negative, but I'm sorry. And remember when President Biden said that he wouldn't tolerate war profiteering? Well, they made the biggest, they condemn Bernie, they condemn Biden. The Democrats eat their own. That's why we don't get anywhere. And I'm not a Democrat. I'm a Bernie, progressive democratic socialist. And do I have any say in this? Do I have anybody fighting for me? No, I do not. Because, like you said, the two-party system. And don't tell me we couldn't have figured something better out, better by now. Because we started with 3.9 million people in this country, and now we're at 100 times that, and we're still following the same stupid rules. Electoral college, filibuster, the whole bit. They keep telling me they're going to get money out of politics. It's worse than ever. And that's all they talk about when they say, oh, well, they spent record amount of money on the elections this year. Well, why is that? Because you didn't do anything about it. They never do anything about it. We have ping-pong government. One party comes in and makes laws or rules or whatever. The next party comes in, turns them all over. And that's all we have. We don't have democracy in this country. Ping-pong government, back and forth. He comes in and changes everything. The next guy comes in and changes everything. And, of course, it's the next guy. God forbid, this country would have a woman or a minority president. Well, we had the minority president, but, I think that was a fluke.
Well, he got reelected, Nancy. I mean, he got elected twice, so that's as good as anybody can do.
I was all for Biden. Believe me, I was crying. I mean, Obama. I was crying when he got elected the first time.
No, I know you were. I'm just saying I don't think it was a fluke. I think that country is still here. We have to find it again. Anyway, Nancy, I got to move on. But thank you.
A broken clock is right twice a day. But enough people came out then. But they're not making it so that people want to vote.
Well, right. And the other guys are making it harder to vote at every opportunity. Yep. All right, Nancy, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to go now to Brian.
Edwin, important show as always. And I wanted to say that like Nancy, I'm a democratic socialist and a big supporter of Bernie Sanders and AOC and Nina Turner, people like that. But, I don't understand it. I mean, I had no problem voting for Kamala Harris, I know that it's most of the message. They talk about messaging, and most of the radio dial, except for WCPT and then on MSNBC, leans to the right. But if I could see through all that, then how come other people can't? And I wanted to ask you, Edwin.
How much is this monstrosity of a bill going to take out of Medicare? Do you know?
Well, the House. Yeah, I'm still here. Okay. I don't know I don't know, and we're not done with it yet, right? Because it's still got to go to the Senate, and then they've got to negotiate it. So we really don't know. But they're taking an enormous amount out of Medicaid. They're not taking much out of Medicare, but there are rules that if certain federal deficit things get triggered, then Medicare gets cut. So they're relying on those triggers to do it, so they don't have to, even though they've put us in a position where Medicare would be cut. And it's not a very good answer, but it's the best I can do at the moment. Look, if we're up to the Republicans, there would be no social safety net. There would be no Social Security or Medicare. They want to roll it all back and say the corporations will take care of you. That's America. You know, work hard and you'll be fine. And it's, of course, dishonest and dangerous and cruel.
Well, that's all the messaging the Democrats need for the next upcoming the midterms, because all they have to say is, look, they're cutting your health care. They want to take away all your social safety nets, including SNAP benefits, to give tax cuts to billionaires and multimillionaires. That's all you need for them to keep saying.
Well, as my very smart wife said to me the other day, here's what they've done. Everything is going to be more expensive and less safe. That's what's happened with these guys. It's their idea of America. More expensive, less safe.
Well, thank you so much for taking my call, Edwin.
Of course. Thank you for being part of this community. You too. All right, let's head west and Paul.
Hey, Edwin. It's funny. It's hard to focus, as your guest said, when the zone is flooded with poop. But a few things crossed my mind, so I'll just throw them out there. Donald Trump he operates just with retribution and vindictiveness. That's all he has. So I was trying to think about why this attack on Harvard, why this attack on Columbia University. And then it just hit me. Oh, well, usually the protocol that someone follows when they would like to advance the admission of an underqualified student is to endow this college with a lovely endowment. But that's not how the Trump works. So my suspicion is that poor Barron was not accepted to Columbia or Harvard. And of course, he is going to NYU, and that's a great college too. But anybody who applies to NYU, I would think also apply to Columbia and to Harvard. So that's pretty much because the whole case is absolute BS. There's nothing; it holds no water. The other thing about immigration, I'll hit on this, is that an immigration attorney that I know says that anybody who goes before an immigration magistrate who is represented by counsel, 90% of them win their case and are allowed to stay in the country. Those who don't have a representation, have an attorney, 90% of them lose their case. So it's clear that the Trump administration wants to bypass the due process because, and also most immigration attorneys for all these things, it's pro bono. It's volunteer because a lot of these people don't have any money to have a high-powered attorney. They certainly don't have South African wealth, let's put it that way. So, in those connections, it's just disturbing how this bill has progressed and what's in it. The more you learn, especially neutering the courts with this, the clauses about contempt of court power.
Contempt. Yep.
That's very disturbing.
It's all disturbing. It's unbelievable that the members of Congress, the Republicans in Congress, are complicit in trying to destroy the democracy. There isn't and I think Sean Casten, Representative Casten, said it really quite well earlier in this show. It's a race between because what they're doing is so unpopular, whether democracy will destroy the Republican Party or the Republican Party will destroy democracy. And that's the fight.
Well, and just two things left. For Nancy, when I had the program on Sundays, I had political science professor Margaret Hershey, professor emeritus. I asked her, why, if Donald Trump were to win, he'd be the second to win non-consecutive terms. And I said, what happened with Grover Cleveland? Why did America fall in love with Grover Cleveland? Well, I know why they liked him the first time, because Chester Arthur was horrible. But then they fell in love with Benjamin Harrison, and then they fell out of love with Benjamin Harrison, and then they fell in love with Grover Cleveland again. I said, why the fickle America? She said, they didn't. I said, well, they didn't. She said, no. America, just the people that supported Grover Cleveland, supported him both times. It was a question of who turned out. The margin.
Yeah, always the case.
The Democratic margin just didn't turn out in 2024 for whatever reason. We're still analyzing that. And just to finish up, I wanted to say my dad, who was I don't know if he was a Reagan Republican, but he was voted Republican mostly. I learned before he died in 2021 of COVID. Thank you, Donald Trump. He wasn't as conservative as maybe I thought he was, but he gave up the Republican Party and voted for Barack Obama in 2008, and he never voted Republican again. And he voted for Hillary Clinton. And I remember a family discussion that came up on Father's Day. I was shocked that Dad brought it up, because he would never bring up politics during a family discussion. He picked up the newspaper and he said, "Did you see this?" Because my sister voted. She said, "You're not going to vote for Hillary, are you, Dad?" And he said, "I'm not voting for Donald Trump, honey." And he picked up the newspaper and said, "Did you see this? Donald Trump says that Vietnam was his VD." And it was because my dad's brother, Billy, was 6 years older. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps the week of December 7th, 1941. He shipped out after Christmas in January of 1942. He was stationed in England. He flew many, many missions over Germany in that 3 years. Germany had been defeated, but on April 29th, 1945, on a routine reconnaissance mission on a Sunday morning, plane encountered mechanical failure and crashed.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And I don't think my grandparents ever got over it, because Christmas 1945 was supposed to be the greatest Christmas ever. The war was over, and Billy would be coming home. And
that is a Memorial Day story worth telling. Yeah. Hey, thank you, Paul. Yeah. I appreciate it.
Yes, you bet.
All right, I got a minute and a half left, so I'm going to give it to Earl for anything you want, Earl.
All right, thank you, Edwin, and happy holidays to everybody, and I'm going to try to keep it short. One of the things I would love to see the Democratic Party do is just pound into the ground the fact that they are financially irresponsible. Voodoo economics. That's what H used to say about Ronald Reagan's policies, because how in the heck you going to bring down the deficit and keep giving these large tax cuts to the people who who have the most money? I mean, the trickle-down economy doesn't work. It has never worked. It has never shown to have worked. Another thing, we ought to be able to pound in all of the social safety net projects, and what's happening to IRS. If you don't have IRS agents, how you going to collect money from the rich and the famous? It's just so much out there that we could put together and have a campaign if we had the funds to promote it. right now, right-wing talk media is promoting Donald Trump as the greatest president. And right now, the Democrats are jumping down Joe Biden's throat. You know, I mean, we just go at it inappropriately. We don't fight to win. We don't stand up for our individual, and we don't stick with our people. You know, we throw them overboard quicker than cotton liver pills or something like that. Thank you for taking my call, man.
You're very welcome. Enjoy the holiday. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for spending some of your holiday weekend with me. Hang in there, and if you've lost someone and are mourning them on Memorial Day, our thoughts are with you and with all of those heroes who fought for the things that we may lose anyway. Thank you. I'll talk to you next week. Bye.